We're ready to go now. Good to see everybody tonight, and we're going to get started with our Acts Bible study that we've been going through for the last few months, and we are on chapter 14 tonight. Since chapter 10, we have been noticing this kind of growing discussion about the gospel and who it's for. Remember, the first part of first part of Acts, we noticed that the focus was mainly on the Jews. Then, with Peter and his vision and Cornelius and all of that transition there in Acts chapter 11, we begin seeing more and more Gentiles come to faith and receive grace and forgiveness in the Holy Spirit. Now when we get to Acts 14, we see this unified model of evangelism that is going to targeting all people, not just the Jews, but Gentiles as well. And if we had to title the lesson, if we had to give this lesson a title, tonight we would call it Evangelism 101, because it's exactly what we see taking place here. Matter of fact, Paul and Barnabas almost give us an outline of what we should do as far as when we are trying to share the gospel with others. The start of chapter 14 tells the story of Paul and Barnabas as they continue their journey through Antioch of Pisidia that we mentioned the last time we were together, through that area of Galatia, and eventually they make their way back all the way to the base camp. I call it base camp, but it's there in Antioch, that first place where the believers were first called Christians. That place. Now, that's where they're going to end up at the end of chapter 14. We started this journey in chapter 13 when they went over into that little island in the Mediterranean and started taking their what they call the first missionary journey we talked about in chapter 13. Chapter 14 is like a continuation of the story and the narrative of what's going on. Now, as we follow them along their way, we're going to discover this really a blueprint for how we should share the gospel, how we should evangelize others. And so hopefully it'll be a blessing for you as we go through this chapter tonight. So Acts chapter 14, thank you so much for joining us tonight, whether in person or online. We appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and begin. Let's read verses 1 through 3 as we begin the chapter. First of all, it says, "And now it happened in Iconium, that they went together to the synagogue of the Jews, and so spoke that a great multitude, both of the Jews and of the Greeks, believed. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brethren. Therefore they stayed there a long time, speaking boldly in the Lord, who was bearing witness to the word of his grace, granting signs and wonders to be done by their hands." So we see here Paul and Barnabas going to Iconium here, and it's a little city outside of Antioch Pisidia, which is where they had been in the end of chapter 13. But remember that in the end of chapter 13, they got ran out. They got ran out of town. They got ran off because they were, preaching and people were believing, and the Jews got jealous of them and kind of ran them out of town. So now they just go to the next town and they do the same thing, out preaching the gospel, sharing the gospel. Many people are believing, both Jew and Gentile, but the unbelieving Jews are not liking it. They're not liking what's going on, and so they stir up the Gentiles and cause them to have this embittered spirit in them, and it really causes them to turn on Paul and Barnabas. But Paul and Barnabas felt the Lord was working in that area, and it was being confirmed by the signs that were following, because there were signs and wonders happening. So there were miracles. Things were taking place. And so they were continuing to continue to minister there. Whether the people liked it or not, they were going to be continuing to minister there. So what does this tell us about evangelism? What are they telling us through their actions? Well, first we should understand is if we're going to be sharing the gospel as evangelists, which we all are called to do, sharing the gospel truth and through our lives is evangelism, is what it's all about. we're all called to that task, that spiritual discipline. We should be persistent. Now, again, I said Paul and Barnabas were seeing great things done, were they not? Again, verse 3, signs and wonders were being accomplished. They felt that the Lord was, demonstrating His grace in the lives of those around them. But at the same time, the enemy was at work. Isn't it true that many times when you try to do something good for the Lord, that the enemy is going to be present there to try to resist you? It's going to be that struggle, that's opposition. And when it happens, our temptation is to give up. Our temptation is to give in. Our temptation is to, back down or whatever. But we shouldn't give up so easily. Just because we, run into a little bit of a roadblock, or maybe we have a little bit of opposition, or maybe because somebody slams the door in our face. Years ago, we used to go more door-to-door evangelism than we do now. I know some of y'all did it, and we did it. I did it a lot, where you go knock on doors and you invite people to church or talk to them about the Lord, take your Bible up to the door. But and not even many religions that used to be famous for this don't even do it anymore. That's not a way people do it anymore, because a lot of times people don't answer their doors. They got smart cameras and stuff. They don't need to answer their door. They can see who it is before they used to have to peek out the window and stuff like that. Well, people know kind of what's going on, and people are just private. They're more nervous, and besides that, the person on the other side of that door you're knocking on might have a gun. People are crazy too. So, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you're out there talking about the Lord, and somebody wants to turn you down or say, I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to have anything to do with that. You might get discouraged. You might want to give up. But I say stick with it, because these guys certainly did. No matter how it was, how they were being mistreated, or how people weren't liking them, standing up against them, Paul and Barnabas were going to keep on keeping on. All right, let's look at verses 4 to 7. See the next kind of part of this blueprint as they lay it out for us, and what we should do as far as sharing our faith. Verses 4 to 7. But the multitude of the city was divided. Part sided with the Jews, and part with the apostles. And when a violent attempt was made by both the Gentiles and Jews with their rulers to abuse and stone them, they became aware of it and fled to Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and to the surrounding region. And they were preaching the gospel there. So this tells you the next thing. So I know we should be persistent, but sometimes you got to be prudent, right? Sometimes you got to understand that if somebody's going to threaten your life, if you find out somebody is trying to hurt you or harm you, it's nothing wrong with getting out of the way and protecting yourself, and being wise with yourself, and not just walking into the middle of a fight or something. These guys proved it by their actions. This was Paul. The one who was, we know, was not scared of anything, pretty much. He was that kind of guy, and yet he decided, hey, when he heard about this attempt, somebody was going to abuse them, somebody was going to stone them, he was going to get out of there and go another way. But again, the idea was they're not going to stop preaching, they're just going to find another city. We've already preached here, signs and wonders have been done, now we're going to go somewhere else. And so that was kind of their thinking. And sometimes you might realize that you might need to consider an exit strategy when it comes to a particular situation that you're in. If you're out there talking to somebody about the Lord and you feel like you're in danger, you just got to be prudent about the situation. Notice verses 8 through 13. And in Lystra, a certain man, this is where they went. Remember Derbe, Lystra, those two cities of Lycaonia. That's where they are, little towns, if you will. And in Lystra, a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. This man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, "Stand up straight on your feet." And he leaped and walked. Now when the people saw what Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men." And Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. Then the priest of Zeus, whose temple was in front of their city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, intending to sacrifice with the multitudes. So this is really a strange story, okay? Here is Paul and Barnabas. They go, they're leaving one town because the people didn't like them. They go into this next town. Here he is. They're preaching the gospel, right? That's what they're going to do, preach the gospel. They're out there preaching the gospel. But in this case, Paul sees somebody who needs help. He sees somebody that's lame. All he can tell is this man is lame. He can't walk. What we learn from, Luke as he's expounding on it, apparently Luke, in his investigation, as he were, writing all this down and wanting to put out an accurate record so we can know that the Holy Spirit, and all this was, God was working in all of this. The Acts of the Apostles, remember that was Luke's main deal. He wanted to make sure there was an accurate record. So in his investigation, he finds out this guy is lame from his birth. He never walked before. So we know that from Luke's investigation, as he's the author. But Paul sees the guy, sees that he needs help, sees that he has faith. I don't know how he saw he had faith, but apparently he saw that he had faith. And he asked the guy to stand up. And the guy stands up, and there's the miraculous healing takes place. And it just goes to show you, sometimes as you're out there trying to evangelize others, trying to share the gospel with someone else, trying to do good by, sometimes you have to change up your methods. In other words, there's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to how we are to evangelize, how we are to share the gospel, how we are to tell others about the Lord. Sometimes you're going to be sharing with them through the Word. Sometimes the greatest witness is a kind act, some kind of act of kindness, some kind of simple thing, doing something good for someone. So don't get stuck on one particular method. Somebody says, well, this is the way we've always done it. We can't do Saturday serve unless we do this, or we can't do do soul winning unless we do this is the method we do. Just think about it. I know we all have had those Jehovah's Witnesses knock on our door, but Jehovah's Witnesses don't do that anymore. They even change their methods up. And so sometimes you need to change your methods. The mission never changed, right? The message never changes. We're to go and take the gospel to all people, every creature. But sometimes our methods need to be flexible, and we need to remain flexible. And don't get so narrow-minded that we can't see others in need around us. If Paul was only focused on preaching the gospel and just ignored this guy, then this guy's life would have never been changed. But apparently, he made a tremendous change in the guy's life. And we talked about this before when we seen people be healed. We talked about this miracle before. Once somebody is healed that was lame in that time, it is life-changing to them, okay? It's life-changing to somebody. It would be life-changing to me and you if we'd never walked. Think about it. If you had never walked before and suddenly you've been given the ability to walk. But today, with technology the way it is and things the way they are, people can be quadriplegic, paraplegic, and they can still live a life. I mean, people can drive cars and talk and do all these kinds of crazy things. You can do all kinds of stuff now that you used to not be able to do. But back then, you were just left to be a beggar, basically.
The jobs he could do back in that time frame were much fewer.
Yeah, exactly. Think about
nowadays, you sit behind a computer.
People can, if they can speak or if they can put any kind of words out of their mouth. I don't know. Computers can put the words on the screen for them. I don't know. It's amazing what people can do that are limited physically, but yet. It was certainly life-changing for this guy back then. So be flexible in your method when it comes to evangelism, and certainly when you're thinking about how you approach talking to somebody about the Lord. All right, let's look at verses 14 to 18. So we continue to follow them along this journey. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude, crying out and saying, "Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you, and preach to you that you should turn from these useless things to the living God, who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all things that are in them, who in bygone generations allowed all nations to walk in their own ways. Nevertheless, he did not leave himself without witness, in that he did good, gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. And with these sayings, they could scarcely restrain the multitude from sacrificing to them. So, going back to what happened, they do this miracle, and suddenly these people are like, the gods have come down here to us. Now, apparently in that city of Lystra, there was a Greek temple that worshipped the god of Zeus. So they had a priest there, and upon seeing this miracle that took place, they assume that Zeus has come down with his messenger Hermes, and now they're among them. They've taken on bodily form and they've come down among them. So they would go back. Now, for all we know, they said it in the Laconian language. So we don't really know if Paul could understand that language or not. But there seems to be a little bit of delay in the time whenever these guys say this, and they run back to the priest, and the priests get this stuff. They're going to come sacrifice to Paul and Barnabas. But whenever they come back with these sacrifices, these things to sacrifice to them, lay these accolades at their feet, they suddenly realize what's going on, and then they rush out to the people, and they're showing an act of humility and a brokenness as they tear their clothes, and they say no, which was very common in that day when you wanted to show like a brokenness and really get somebody's attention. A lot of times people would tear their clothes as a sign before God that they were broken before God and they really want to get the attention of God. So they rip their clothes and they go out there before them and they say, listen, no, we're not trying to, we're just like you. They were just honest people like you. And it really spoke to me that they could have easily been the people, let those people think whatever they wanted to think, and remember Herod? Not long ago, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, when Herod made an ovation to himself, and he had this holiday for himself, and he wanted the people to worship him, and the people came and worshiped him, and they said, your words are like the words of a god. Remember that when Herod did that? And what happened to him? Remember he got killed? I mean, God took his life that very night. So, they given us a better example to do when something like this happens. They were honest and they were saying, no, we're sinful men. We're just like you. We're made in the fashion that you are. We need a Savior just like you do. We need God, and we're asking you, we're begging you to turn to God and get away from these things that you're following, these useless things, these dead gods, these Greek gods. They won't do you any good. Turn to the God, and they reference the God of creation. They reference the God of the sun, the God who made the sun, the earth, the sea, all the things that are in it. They reference that, and they reference even Christ in that he sent a witness, and that's Jesus that they reference. They didn't call Jesus by name, and it's kind of like what they did was, first of all, they were honest, they were transparent. I think sometimes honesty is our best witness. When we go in to talk to somebody, say, and I'm not talking about self-deprecation. I'm not saying you go up and say, oh, look at all the bad stuff I've done. But don't go into a holier-than-thou kind of method when you go up to talk to somebody about the Lord. And you're saying, well, going in and kind of thinking, and you don't necessarily have to say it, but if you think that you're better than somebody else when you go to talk to them or witness to them, that'll kind of, it won't go, it'll be noticed, and it'll kind of come through in that conversation. So be transparent. Say, hey, I make mistakes just like you. I'm not perfect. I've done some of the same things that, that everybody else has done. This is the kind of stuff I've done before, and I needed the Lord. And I had to turn to God, and I realized God forgives me. He loves me. And if he can love and accept me the way I am, for who I am, he can love and accept you too. So that's kind of what they were doing. They were honest with these guys and shared the truth in a way that they could understand. And again, I think that'll go a long way. So let's look at verses 19 and 20 as we continue to follow them along this way. So then the Jews from Antioch and Iconium came there. Can you see what's going on? Everywhere they go, every city they go to, here's the Jews. This is the unbelieving Jews. They're They're always popping up, whatever city. It's almost like they got a telephone line, or almost like they got a text. Hey, they're coming your way. They're in your city now. Get ready. Go get them. Some word gets back to the Jews in that town. Next thing you know, they're out there, wanting to confront them. And notice what happens. So now they're back here in Antioch, and the Jews from Antioch and Iconium, the places where they came from, they're here, and they're having persuaded the multitudes. They stone Paul, dragging him out of the city, supposing him to be dead. Now, I often wonder, where's Barnabas in all of this? Maybe at this time, Barnabas was back at the house or something, or, wherever they were staying. Maybe Paul was caught, by himself. Maybe they were in two different locations. We see Paul and Barnabas mentioned in kind of coupling together as they go out, but that doesn't mean that they were always together, whenever they were ministering. So perhaps Barnabas is not with Paul. Perhaps Barnabas gets separated in a crowd, and this is what they do to Paul, him being the, kind of main spokesperson anyway, because Barnabas is more of the quiet one. He's more of the, I got your back kind of guy, but apparently in this situation, Barnabas didn't have his back, right? Yeah, he was way back. He's way back somewhere. So they drag Paul out, and this is one of those times when Paul is stoned to death, okay? Remember, he tells his testimony later on in several books. I think in Corinthians, he shares it to the church there in Corinth. He says, three times stoned to death. So this is one of those times when he was stoned to death. However, when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up and went to the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. So in this case, and we have all indication that he died, but somehow God raised him up and allowed him to come back to life, and brought him back to life and give him a second chance to live out his life. And so he just gets up and he goes back with Barnabas to Derbe, which was the next town over. So you had Lystra and Derbe, which was in this town of Laconia, or kind of county, if you will. So it's a bigger area, sort of like Antioch is a bigger area, Antioch, Pisidia, and then Galatia. And this Laconia is another bigger area, and under that is these two little towns. So they leave Lystra and they go to Derbe. So that tells you what? Well, it tells you to be faithful.
Kind of funny, he went back into the city, he was just carried out, right?
Yeah, that's right. So sometimes we understand that standing up for the gospel will cost you greatly. But we understand the Lord never calls us to success. He doesn't call us to greatness. What does the Lord call us to? He calls us to be faithful. He just says, be faithful. He always honors those who are faithful to Him. When we get to heaven, what is indication the Lord said to the faithful servant? He said, welcome thou good and faithful servant. That's all He's looking for. He's looking for somebody who will be faithful. He's always honoring faithful people, especially those who are faithful in the face of persecution. If you're faithful in the face of persecution, it seems like He's going to honor you for sure, and even more so for those who are faithful to the end, those who die a martyr's death. And that certainly was lived out in the life of Paul. Look at verse 21 and then 20 through 25. And when they had preached the gospel to that city and made many disciples, they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith, and saying, we must through many tribulations enter the kingdom of God. So I'll finish reading those last three verses in just a minute, but just real quick, they went right back to places where they were run out of. Right back through what did they do? They just went right back through the same places they came from. All the way back to Antioch of Pisidia, they went right back to those places. By the way, that's kind of how they were going to go home. They were going to go home back that way. But they go right back through the way. Why? Because some people had believed. Somebody had been led to the Lord. People had come to faith, and they wanted to encourage them. They wanted to be helping them. They wanted to help them along. And so it wasn't, this was going back to the place where he was stoned to death. Places where he was run out of town. Places where he was threatened to be killed. And yet he and Barnabas go back through those towns, encouraging the souls and disciples, exhorting them. Notice what it says in verse 23. So when they had appointed elders in every church, and prayed with fasting. They commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. And after that they had passed through Pisidia, they came to Pamphylia. And when they had preached the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. So now they're kind of going back down to the coast. They're going to go back around and ship back out through the Mediterranean Sea and back up over into Antioch, the home base, where all the other disciples are. So this tells us what? It tells us to be encouraging. You know, they just didn't convert the people to faith and say, okay, good luck. You know, hope you go to church. Hope you can make it in this faith. Hope you do well. I mean, they couldn't do that. This was a town of people. There weren't many churches. There wasn't a lot going on. There were synagogues, but there weren't Christian churches. There weren't a lot of people, believers there. So they had to encourage them. They had to strengthen them. Notice that they put elders. They established elders. That's people who would be leaders in churches, leaders in the various churches, so that and back then, most of the time, it was a house church. So they would go to Charlie's house, and Charlie would be an elder, and they'd go to Cheryl's house, and they'd find an elder there to lead that church. And whoever would open their house up to have a church in it, they would put an elder there, and that's how you'd come to find later on Timothy, an elder, is placed in the church there at Ephesus. And so he was a convert of Paul. So that just goes to show you that's kind of how it was being done. They were putting leaders in the churches so they can strengthen these disciples and help them grow in their faith. And he helping them to kind of be faithful and don't give up and continue helping them. They revisited them along the way, and they encouraged them to be persistent, to not give up, to not quit. As it would be they would be tempted to quit with all the opposition they'd be facing. Okay, so that tells us we should be encouraging others. And evangelism is not just getting somebody to pray a prayer. It's not just getting somebody to come to church. It's not getting somebody to say, I believe in the Lord or whatever. It's about building a relationship with that person, encouraging that person, helping them find a church so they can get plugged into where they can grow in their faith, and then following up with them and being somewhat of a spiritual mentor to them. That's what we, I think, fall short many times in our churches today, is that we focus on maybe getting somebody to walk an aisle, pray a prayer, get baptized or what have you, but we don't continue with that spiritual mentorship. And we see that pattern laid out here for us in Paul and Barnabas. And notice lastly in verses 26, I says 22, but it should be 26 through 28. From there they sailed to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of God for the work which they had completed. So Luke here is identifying this city is not Antioch of Pisidia, which is north of the Mediterranean Sea. This is now which would be southwest of the sea, the Mediterranean. He says they sailed there to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of God. This is where they were first called out, they called out Barnabas and Paul and sent them on their journey. And now it's completed. Now when they had come and gathered to the church together, they reported all that God had done with them, and that how He had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. So they stayed there for a long time with the disciples. So that gives you something else that we should do, and that is when we're doing evangelism or sharing our faith, that we should be rejoicing. We should testify and give testimony. If you have an opportunity to talk to somebody about the Lord or share your faith with somebody, and something good comes out of it, even if that good means they just listened, Maybe they didn't, confirm that they believe, but maybe they just listened to you and accepted you, were accepting to what you were saying or what you were doing. Then get excited about it and share it with someone else. And they were excited to share with the very ones that had sent them. And that's awesome to come back together and share those testimonies with the church.
So that gets back to the whole, we're only supposed to be a witness. We're not supposed to win people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's all we're called to do is tell them, point them to Jesus, and that's all we're called to do. And so they were excited about what God had allowed them to accomplish, or through their work, through this mission, this first missionary journey. And mainly, it was more and more Gentiles coming to faith. We see that. Now we start seeing this shift that it's less and less about the Jews and more about all people. And the gospel now are coming into the fold. And it's interesting that they stayed there a long time. Wonder why? Wonder why they stayed there a long time in Antioch. You got any ideas? Really doesn't give us any indication in Scripture. I believe maybe they stayed there a long time because they were, the man had been stoned to death. Okay, he probably needs a little break. Done a lot of traveling. Back then again, we're not talking about you just get on an airplane and fly, 30 minutes over to one city, a train, a couple hours to get to one place. We're talking about ships, weeks, sailboats, and we're not motorized boats, sailboats that you got to depend on the wind, and you got to get a ride and all this rest. It was not an easy way of life. I'm sure they needed some rest. They needed some recuperation, and perhaps those at the church needed Paul and Barnabas to do some work and some help there in the church at Antioch.
It was not safe either, Trevor.
Yeah.
One of the scriptures I was reading when I was teaching a week or two ago, whenever it was, Jesus actually asked the disciples if they had swords.
Yeah.
He asked them that question.
Yeah. Yeah, you never know if somebody's going to come up and try to rob you or hurt you. That was often the case. And even Jesus told the story of the parable, the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. That guy, he said about the guy was traveling along, come upon a robber who, beat him up and took all of his stuff. So, yeah, that's certainly possible. All right, so as we wrap it up, just a reminder, be persistent. Don't give up on, being faithful or being persistent in what you're trying to do. Even when you face a little opposition, be faithful. Don't quit. Be prudent, be wise. The Bible talks about being gentle as a dove, but wise as a serpent, right? So, we are to not be like a bull in a china shop, but at the same time, we are to be kind of that subtle, that wise to make the right decisions and not put ourselves in harm's way. But be flexible. Don't get stuck in ourselves in a box. I heard, read a little article post about the Gen Zs. Which is sort of like, I guess now, Sarah's age. Is that Gen Z? Is that what we're talking about? Gen Z? I think Gen Z is the Sarah's age now. I get mixed up in all these different generations. But anyway, the next generation, the ones that are coming up now, that are not yet reached adulthood, that generation, they were saying how they responded to, people communicating with them. People communicate best whenever they see it through action and not words. In other words, they would be more apt to respond to a kind act and listen to you better when they see that you're treating them in a loving way as you're doing some kindness toward them, showing some kind of kindness toward them, unmerited kindness, versus you coming up to them and saying, hey, I want to talk to you about Jesus or the Lord. And so we have to be kind of adaptive, flexible in how we approach various age groups. Some people will be fine with you saying, hey, can I show you from the Bible how you can know the Lord? Or, but then other people, you might have to show them through maybe building a relationship through acts of kindness or something. But just be flexible. Be honest and be transparent in how you talking to people and not putting yourself up on a high horse, but letting people know that you're just as in need of a Savior as they are. Be faithful. God honors that faithfulness. Be encouraging. And when you do, or you're able to build a relationship with somebody, encourage them in the faith, helping them along, and also be rejoicing. All of this is the kind of the pattern that Paul and Barnabas laid out for us here in chapter 14. And hopefully it'll be an encouragement to us as we are out there trying to evangelize others and share our faith with others. Right.
But it's not, it comes down to being flexible again. It's not the way that people are used to being approached as much now.
Yeah.
I mean, the online thing of people, the lack of direct interaction, I mean, it affects business, it affects how people
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
A complete lack of customer service. It just gets worse and worse.
And the church can do one of two things. We can do one of two things. We can sit back and say, well, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to keep doing the stuff the way I've always done it, and get mad at other people for changing the way they do it. Or we can get on the ball and say, what works? How are people interacting? How can I put the gospel in front of people? What methods can I use? No. The mission should never change. The message should never change. Sometimes you have to change your methods. And oftentimes what happens with our churches, many times it's easier to criticize people for the way they're doing it. But I heard one time, and this was a long time ago, because Charles Spurgeon, a lady came up to him and said she didn't like the way he evangelized people, how he shared the gospel. And he said, well, how do you do it? She said, I don't. And he said, well, I like my way of doing it better than your way of not doing it. So, it's not, the best thing is just do something, but it's easy to criticize, but criticizing without doing anything is not getting you anywhere. And the church can't just stick our head in a hole and think that, well, I'm just going to keep doing the way we've always done it and the Lord, will reach these people. No, that God gives us opportunity. We should try to be flexible.
And even if He will reach them without you,
yeah,
you're just losing out on the blessing.
That's right. Yeah. And that's what we're called to do. So I think the Lord, can use all of us in some way, some fashion, some form, if we're sensitive to His leading. And I think that's what Paul and Barnabas were. They were just sensitive to where the Lord was working, to where the Lord was leading, and just went kind of wherever the Lord was leading them to go. All right. We're going to go ahead and wrap up tonight with some prayer. Maybe if you're joining us online, you'd like to share a prayer request with us, you can go to our website, riveroakscc.org, and there you can click on the prayer tab and leave a prayer request there. We'll be able to pray for you. Or you can leave it in the comments section below. Those of you who are in person, we'll take prayer requests in just a moment. Until the next time, may the Lord bless you always. Thank you for joining us.